The first thing you need to understand about Operation Blackwater is that it never should have happened. When the encrypted transmission crackled through the Joint Operations Center at 3:47 hours, most of the brass thought it was a mistake. 6 Navy SEALs had gone dark in the Helmand province, their last known position, a Taliban stronghold so heavily fortified that even the most seasoned military analysts called it a death trap. The mission parameters were simple in theory: extract the team before dawn. In reality, it was a suicide run that no pilot in their right mind would accept. The briefing room fell silent when the operations officer finished reading the intelligence report. 12 surface-to-air missile sites, concentrated anti-aircraft fire from elevated positions, a narrow canyon approach that funneled aircraft into a killing field with no escape routes. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly, with sandstorms reducing visibility to near zero. The Pentagon had already written off the mission, quietly preparing casualty notifications for 6 families back home. That's when Captain Reese Phoenix Nakamura stepped forward from the back of the room. At 5'4" with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much, she didn't look like the kind of pilot who could change the course of military history. Most of her colleagues still saw her as the mechanic's daughter from Oahu who'd somehow talked her way into an A-10 Thunderbolt cockpit. They remembered the snickers during flight training, the whispered jokes about her unconventional flying style, the way senior officers would pause just a beat too long before acknowledging her tactical suggestions. What they didn't know was that Phoenix had been studying this exact terrain for 3 months, memorizing every ridge line and approach vector during her off-duty hours. While other pilots were playing poker or video games, she was running simulations, calculating fuel burn rates and weapons loads for scenarios just like this one. Her maintenance chief, Master Sergeant Torres, had caught her in the hangar at midnight more than once, tracing her fingers along the titanium armor plating of her aircraft like she was reading Braille. The aircraft in question was tail number 780684, an A-10 Thunderbolt II that most pilots avoided. The plane had a reputation for electrical problems and hydraulic leaks, earning it the unofficial designation of the Widow Maker. But Phoenix saw something else in those weathered control surfaces and battle-scarred wings. She saw a machine built for exactly this kind of impossible mission, designed to absorb punishment and keep flying when everything else would fall from the sky. The room erupted in arguments when she volunteered. Colonel Henderson, the mission commander, looked at her like she just offered to fly to the moon. The other pilots exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of her tactical judgment. Even the normally supportive Torres shook his head slowly, understanding better than anyone what she was proposing to do. Phoenix stood quietly in the center of the storm, her flight suit crisp despite the early hour, her helmet tucked under her arm like a statement of intent. When the voices finally died down, she spoke 4 words that would echo through military academies for decades to come. I can bring them home. The first challenge wasn't the Taliban or the terrain. It was convincing her own command structure that a female pilot could execute a mission that had already defeated conventional military wisdom. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, a veteran of 3 combat tours, pulled Phoenix aside after the briefing. His weathered face carried the weight of difficult decisions, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper as they walked toward the flight line. Nakamura, I've seen good pilots die trying easier missions than this, Webb said, stopping beside a maintenance truck. The approach vector puts you in a 30-second window where you'll take fire from 3 directions simultaneously. Your egress route requires a vertical climb through known SAM coverage. The math doesn't work. Phoenix adjusted her survival vest, checking each piece of equipment with methodical precision. Sir, respectfully, the math never works when you're trying to save lives. That's why we don't send accountants to do this job. Webb studied her for a long moment, recognizing something in her steady gaze that reminded him of his own early days as a combat pilot. What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed? Because I've been preparing for this mission my entire career, even when I didn't know it existed. Phoenix pulled up a tactical display on her tablet, showing the terrain model she'd constructed during countless late-night study sessions. Every pilot sees the obstacles. I see the opportunities. The pre-flight briefing was attended by every available officer, creating an atmosphere more suited to a court-martial than a mission planning session. Intelligence Officer Captain Rodriguez laid out the grim statistics. Average survival time for aircraft in the target area was estimated at 90 seconds. Previous rescue attempts had resulted in the loss of 2 helicopters and their crews, with no successful extractions. Phoenix listened to each assessment without comment, occasionally making notes in her flight log. When Rodriguez finished his presentation, she stood and walked to the tactical display, her movements economical and confident. With a laser pointer, she traced a route that seemed to defy conventional military aviation wisdom. The SAM sites are positioned to intercept aircraft following standard approach patterns, she explained, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. But there's a blind spot here, created by the terrain masking from this ridgeline. If I come in below the radar horizon at exactly this angle, I can reach the target area undetected. Major Collins, a seasoned pilot with obvious skepticism, leaned forward in his chair. That approach puts you 50 feet above the deck in mountainous terrain. One downdraft, one moment of inattention, and you're painting the landscape. Yes, sir, but it also puts me inside their engagement envelope before they can acquire lock-on. Phoenix clicked to the next slide, showing weapons placement and timing calculations. The A-10's GAU-8 cannon gives me the ability to suppress multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining forward momentum toward the extraction point. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as officers processed her tactical analysis. What surprised most of them wasn't just the audacity of her plan, but the thoroughness of her preparation. This wasn't the desperate gamble of an inexperienced pilot seeking glory. It was the calculated strategy of someone who understood both her aircraft's capabilities and the enemy's limitations. Master Sergeant Torres raised his hand from the back of the room. Captain, what's your fuel situation for this profile? Those low-level runs are thirsty, and you're looking at an extended loiter time over the target area. Phoenix nodded, appreciating the technical question. I'll be carrying minimum ammunition load to maximize fuel capacity. Calculated flight time to target is 47 minutes, with a reserve sufficient for 12 minutes of combat operations and emergency egress. The mathematical precision of her answer seemed to shift the room's energy. These weren't the words of someone making an emotional decision. They were the calculations of a pilot who had thought through every aspect of an incredibly complex mission. The walk to the flight line occurred in pre-dawn darkness, with Phoenix's footsteps echoing against the concrete as base personnel prepared for another day of routine operations. None of them knew they were witnessing the beginning of a mission that would be studied in military colleges for generations to come. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat like a sleeping predator on the tarmac, its distinctive twin engines and armored cockpit designed for exactly this kind of ground attack mission. Torres had spent the previous 2 hours personally inspecting every system, knowing that mechanical failure wasn't an option when flying into the kind of concentrated enemy fire that awaited Phoenix in the Helmand Mountains. The aircraft's titanium bathtub, the armored shell surrounding the cockpit, could withstand direct hits from small arms fire, but the mission's success would depend more on pilot skill than armor protection. She's ready, Captain, Torres said, handing Phoenix her helmet. All systems green, weapons loaded per your specifications. I've also taken the liberty of installing additional chaff and flare dispensers. You're going to need every defensive measure available. Phoenix accepted the helmet, nodding the fresh call sign stenciled below the visor. Phoenix. It was the first time her unofficial nickname had appeared on official equipment, a small gesture that meant more than Torres probably realized. For 3 years, she'd been fighting to prove herself worthy of the same respect automatically granted to her male colleagues. The pre-flight inspection revealed an aircraft that had been prepared with exceptional care. Every panel was secure, every system had been tested and retested. The 13 GAU-8 cannon that formed the A-10 spine was loaded with a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds, carefully selected for the mission's specific requirements. Wing-mounted pylons carried additional defensive countermeasures and a reduced fuel load that would give Phoenix the range she needed, without compromising maneuverability. As she climbed into the cockpit, Phoenix felt the familiar sensation of the aircraft becoming an extension of her own body. The control surfaces responded to her touch with the precision that came from hundreds of hours of flight time, but today felt different. Today, 6 lives depended on her ability to push both machine and pilot beyond their documented limitations. The engine startup sequence proceeded normally, with the twin turbofans spinning up to operational speed as Phoenix completed her final systems checks. Radio chatter filled her headset as other aircraft conducted routine operations, but she filtered out everything except the essential communication from the control tower. In 30 minutes, she would be flying into the most heavily defended airspace in the theater of operations. Tower, Phoenix requesting departure clearance for Operation Blackwater. The response came immediately. Phoenix cleared for departure, Godspeed. Those 2 words, Godspeed, told Phoenix everything she needed to know about how the control tower personnel viewed her chances of success. It wasn't the standard good hunting or stay safe that usually concluded mission communications. It was the send-off reserved for pilots who might not be coming home. The takeoff roll felt longer than usual, weighted down by the gravity of what lay ahead. As the A-10's wheels left the runway, Phoenix banks toward the mountains where 6 Navy SEALs were fighting for their lives in a valley that most military strategists had already conceded to the enemy. The flight toward the target area passed in deceptive tranquility, with clear skies and minimal radio chatter creating an almost peaceful atmosphere that belied the violence waiting ahead. Phoenix used the time to review her tactical plan one final time, checking and rechecking fuel consumption rates, weapon settings, and emergency procedures. The A-10's heads-up display showed a steady cruise toward coordinates that represented the most dangerous mission of her career. At 23 minutes into the flight, her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission from the operations center. Phoenix, be advised that satellite imagery shows increased activity around the target area. Enemy forces appear to be converging on the SEAL team's position. Time is now critical. The news wasn't entirely unexpected, but it compressed her operational timeline significantly. Phoenix advanced her throttles slightly, trading fuel efficiency for time as she began her descent toward the mountain valley, where Team Bravo had been conducting reconnaissance operations when their communications suddenly ceased 12 hours earlier. The terrain below transitioned from rolling desert to increasingly rugged mountains, with narrow valleys and steep ridgelines that created perfect hiding spots for surface-to-air missile sites. Phoenix's radar warning receiver remained quiet, but she knew that would change dramatically once she entered the engagement area. Taliban forces had learned to keep their systems powered down until the last possible moment, reducing their electronic signature while maintaining their ability to engage incoming aircraft. "Phoenix, this is Overlord," came the voice of the mission commander through her headset. "Latest intelligence suggests enemy strength in the target area has doubled since initial estimates. You are cleared to abort this mission if tactical conditions exceed acceptable risk parameters." Phoenix considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds before responding. "Overlord Phoenix, negative on mission abort. 6 souls are counting on us to bring them home today." Her response generated immediate radio traffic among the various command elements monitoring the mission. Phoenix could hear snippets of conversation as different officers debated the wisdom of allowing her to continue, but she filtered out everything except essential tactical information. The decision had been made, and second-guessing would only compromise her focus when she needed it most. The first visual confirmation of enemy activity came at 31 minutes into the flight, when Phoenix spotted muzzle flashes from small arms fire in the valley below. The SEALs were still alive and fighting, but their position was being overrun by numerically superior enemy forces. Black smoke rose from what appeared to be an improvised defensive position, indicating that the team had been forced to destroy equipment to prevent its capture. Phoenix began her descent toward the target area, following the terrain contours to mask her approach from enemy radar systems. The A-10's low-altitude handling characteristics made this kind of flying possible, but it required absolute concentration and split-second decision-making, as the aircraft negotiated mountain passes at speeds that left no margin for error. Bravo team, this is Phoenix inbound to your position. Authenticate with current extraction coordinates. The response came through heavy static and the sounds of nearby explosions. Phoenix, Bravo 6, coordinates unchanged, taking heavy fire from 3 sides, ammunition critical. The voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Jackson Martinez, the SEAL team leader whose reputation for tactical excellence was legendary throughout special operations communities. If Martinez was calling his ammunition situation critical, the team was down to their final magazines and probably fighting with captured weapons. Phoenix checked her weapons systems one final time as the target area appeared on her horizon, marked by the distinctive smoke plumes and muzzle flashes that indicated ongoing combat operations. The sight that greeted Phoenix as she crested the final ridgeline was worse than even the most pessimistic intelligence estimates had suggested. The SEAL team had taken refuge in a natural rock formation that provided some protection from direct fire, but Taliban forces had established positions on 3 sides of their location, creating a classic killing field with interlocking fields of fire. Worse, enemy reinforcements were visible moving through the valley, apparently intending to complete the encirclement before launching a final assault. Phoenix's tactical display showed at least 6 confirmed SAM sites positioned to provide overlapping coverage of any rescue attempt. The weapons were older Soviet-era systems, but they remained deadly effective against low-flying aircraft. Standard rescue doctrine called for suppression of air defense systems before attempting any extraction, but there wasn't time for the kind of methodical approach that doctrine recommended. Bravo team, Phoenix has visual on your position, marking enemy locations with smoke. Stay down. Phoenix rolled into her attack run, diving toward the valley floor at an angle that would bring her within 50 feet of the enemy positions, while keeping her below the engagement envelope of the SAM sites. The A-10's GAU-8 cannon began firing before she even reached optimal range, sending streams of 30 rounds toward the Taliban positions with surgical precision. The effect was immediate and devastating. Enemy fighters who had been confidently advancing on the SEAL position suddenly found themselves under attack from an aircraft that seemed to appear from nowhere. The distinctive sound of the A-10's cannon, often described as a giant zipper being opened, echoed through the valley as Phoenix's first pass eliminated an entire squad of Taliban fighters. But the enemy response was swift and coordinated. As Phoenix pulled up from her initial attack run, missile launch warnings began sounding in her cockpit. 2 SAM sites had acquired lock and fired almost simultaneously, sending heat-seeking missiles streaking toward her aircraft from different angles. Phoenix deployed flares while executing a defensive maneuver that pushed the A-10 to its structural limits. The first missile was decoyed successfully, but the second maintained lock despite her countermeasures. At the last possible second, she rolled inverted and dove toward the valley floor, using the terrain to break the missile's guidance system. The explosion occurred less than 100 feet from her aircraft, close enough that shrapnel rattled against the A-10's armored hull. Phoenix Overlord, we're showing multiple missile launches. What's your status? Overlord Phoenix, taking fire but still in the fight, continuing attack runs. What Phoenix didn't mention was that her aircraft had sustained damage from the near miss. Warning lights indicated problems with her hydraulic system, and one engine was running at reduced power. But the A-10 had been designed to absorb this kind of punishment and continue fighting, a capability that she was about to test to its absolute limits. Her second attack run targeted the SAM sites themselves, using the canyon walls to mask her approach until the last possible moment. The enemy operators had repositioned their systems after her initial pass, but Phoenix had anticipated this tactical adjustment. She approached from a different angle, using a dry riverbed as cover until she was almost directly above her targets. The 30 cannon rounds tore through the missile launchers like they were made of paper, creating secondary explosions as fuel and warheads detonated. One entire SAM site disappeared in a pillar of black smoke, while the second sustained enough damage to take it permanently out of action. But the surviving enemy forces had learned from watching her attack patterns. As Phoenix began her third pass, concentrated small arms fire erupted from concealed positions throughout the valley. The A-10's armor protected her from most of the incoming rounds, but several found their mark in unprotected areas. Her starboard engine began showing signs of serious damage, with oil pressure dropping rapidly toward critical levels. Bravo Team Phoenix, enemy position suppressed. Can you move to extraction coordinates? Martinez's response was immediate. Phoenix, Bravo 6, we've got 2 wounded who can't walk. Need close air support to clear a path to the LZ. The landing zone was a small clearing approximately 300 meters from the SEAL team's position, but it was covered by enemy fire from elevated positions that Phoenix hadn't yet engaged. Suppressing those positions would require her to fly directly through the most concentrated anti-aircraft fire she'd ever encountered, with an aircraft that was already operating at reduced capability. Phoenix didn't hesitate. Bravo 6 Phoenix, keep your heads down, I'm coming in hot. Her fourth attack run was a masterpiece of tactical flying, executed with precision that would have been impressive in peacetime training conditions. With one engine failing and hydraulic systems compromised, Phoenix guided her through a series of attack patterns that systematically eliminated every enemy position capable of interfering with the extraction. The canyon echoed with the continuous sound of her cannon as she engaged targets from angles that seemed impossible for a fixed-wing aircraft. The toll on her aircraft was severe. By the time she completed her final attack pass, warning lights covered her instrument panel like a Christmas tree. Both engines were running rough, her primary flight controls were responding sluggishly, and fuel was leaking from multiple punctures in her wing tanks. Most pilots would have declared an emergency and headed for the nearest airfield, but Phoenix still had one more job to complete. Overlord Phoenix requesting immediate helicopter extraction for Bravo Team. Valley is secure, but my aircraft won't remain operational much longer. The response from the operations center was immediate. Phoenix, Overlord. Rescue helicopters are 15 minutes out. Can you maintain cover until they arrive? Phoenix looked at her fuel gauge and engine temperature readings, then at the smoke rising from enemy positions throughout the valley. Her aircraft was dying around her, but the SEAL team was still exposed and vulnerable. The mathematics were simple, even if the implications were terrifying. Overlord Phoenix, I'll maintain station until extraction is complete. Those words represented a commitment that Phoenix knew might cost her life. Her fuel situation was critical, her engines were failing, and she was flying an aircraft that could suffer catastrophic system failure at any moment. But 6 men were counting on her to provide the protective umbrella that would allow them to survive until rescue arrived. The next 15 minutes tested every aspect of Phoenix's training and experience, as enemy reinforcements continued arriving in the valley, despite the devastation she had inflicted on their forward positions. Taliban fighters seemed to materialize from caves and hidden positions that hadn't shown up on any intelligence report, forcing Phoenix to engage targets with ammunition that was running dangerously low. Her starboard engine finally failed completely at the 12-minute mark, trailing black smoke as Phoenix struggled to maintain altitude with reduced power. The A-10's single-engine capabilities were well documented, but flying combat missions with half power while taking enemy fire was pushing both aircraft and pilot beyond their design limits. Phoenix Overlord. Rescue helicopters report visual on the valley. Begin your egress when ready. Phoenix checked her fuel gauge one final time before responding. The numbers weren't encouraging. She had perhaps 10 minutes of flight time remaining, with the nearest friendly airfield 23 minutes away. But the SEAL team was moving toward the landing zone under cover of suppressive fire from the approaching helicopters. Overlord, Phoenix beginning egress. Bravo team is moving to extraction coordinates. As Phoenix began her climb out of the valley, enemy forces made one final attempt to shoot down the aircraft that had single-handedly destroyed their carefully planned ambush. Streams of tracer fire rose toward her damaged A-10, but Phoenix had anticipated this last-ditch effort. She dispensed her remaining chaff and flares while executing a climbing turn that kept the terrain between her aircraft and the heaviest concentrations of enemy fire. The view in her rear-view mirrors showed helicopters touching down in the landing zone as the SEAL team moved toward safety. Mission accomplished, but Phoenix's own survival was far from certain. Her remaining engine was running rough and losing power steadily, while her fuel situation had transitioned from critical to desperate. Phoenix, this is Bagram Tower. We're clearing all traffic for your emergency approach. Medical and fire teams are standing by. The final approach to Bagram Airfield was a testament to both pilot skill and aircraft design, as Phoenix nursed her dying A-10 through a controlled descent that used every available trick to stretch her remaining fuel. She had shut down all non-essential systems to reduce power consumption, but her engine temperature continued climbing toward the red line that indicated imminent failure. At 5 miles from the runway, her engine finally seized, leaving Phoenix to execute a dead-stick approach in an aircraft that had never been designed for powerless flight. The A-10's glide characteristics were marginal at best, but Phoenix had trained for this exact scenario during her initial qualification course 3 years earlier. The runway appeared in her windscreen as Phoenix configured her aircraft for what might be her final landing. Emergency vehicles were positioned along the approach path, their crews ready to respond to whatever condition her aircraft would be in when it reached the ground. Phoenix extended her landing gear and lowered her flaps, configuring for an approach that would give her exactly one opportunity to get it right. The touchdown was harder than normal but within acceptable parameters as Phoenix brought her battle-damaged A-10 to a stop on the runway that had never looked more beautiful. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft immediately, but Phoenix remained in her cockpit until she could confirm that Bravo team had been successfully extracted from the valley. Overlord Phoenix, aircraft on deck at Bagram. What's the status of Bravo team? Phoenix Overlord. All 6 personnel extracted successfully with no additional casualties. Outstanding work. Only then did Phoenix shut down her remaining systems and climb out of the cockpit that had carried her through the most challenging mission of her career. As she stood on the tarmac looking at her aircraft, she could count more than 40 bullet holes in the fuselage and wings. It was a miracle that either she or the A-10 had survived the mission. Master Sergeant Torres was the first person to reach her after she climbed down from the aircraft, his expression mixing relief and professional admiration as he surveyed the damage to his carefully maintained machine. Jesus, Captain, I've never seen an A-10 take this kind of punishment and keep flying. Torres walked slowly around the aircraft, cataloging the battle damage with the practiced eye of someone who understood exactly what each bullet hole represented. "You brought her home, but she's never going to fly again." Phoenix nodded, running her hand along the aircraft's scarred fuselage with something approaching affection. The A-10 that everyone had called the Widow Maker had proven itself worthy of a better nickname during the most critical hours of its service life. More importantly, it had brought 6 American servicemen home to their families. The debriefing that followed would become legendary in military aviation circles, not just for the tactical excellence Phoenix had displayed, but for the way she deflected credit to her aircraft, her maintenance team, and the intelligence personnel who had provided the information that made the mission possible. When pressed by senior officers to describe the key factors in her success, Phoenix's answer was characteristically direct. "I had a good machine, good support, and 6 lives depending on getting the job done right." But the real story wasn't contained in the official after-action reports or the commendations that would follow. The real story was in the way attitudes began changing throughout the base as word spread about what Phoenix had accomplished. Pilots who had previously dismissed her as an outsider suddenly wanted to hear her tactical analysis of different engagement scenarios. Maintenance crews started referring to her aircraft by its tail number with the same respect they reserved for combat veterans. The transformation wasn't immediate or universal, but it was noticeable. When Phoenix walked into the officers' club 3 days after the mission, conversations didn't stop the way they used to. Instead, she found herself welcomed into discussions about tactics, aircraft capabilities, and mission planning with a level of acceptance that had been absent during her previous 3 years of service. The formal recognition came 2 weeks later during a ceremony attended by senior officers from throughout the theater of operations. The Distinguished Flying Cross was presented by a general who had initially opposed allowing Phoenix to attempt the rescue mission, but who now spoke about her performance in terms usually reserved for the most legendary combat pilots in Air Force history. "Captain Nakamura's actions during Operation Blackwater represent the finest traditions of American military aviation," the general said, pinning the medal to Phoenix's uniform. "Her tactical innovation, personal courage, and commitment to her fellow service members saved 6 lives and demonstrated that heroism comes in many forms." The medal was gratifying, but what meant more to Phoenix was the sight of Chief Petty Officer Martinez and his 5 teammates sitting in the front row of the ceremony. They had insisted on attending despite their own injuries and scheduled medical treatments, understanding better than anyone what Phoenix's skill and courage had meant to their survival. After the ceremony, Martinez approached Phoenix with the kind of direct communication that special operations personnel appreciated. "Captain, I've served with a lot of pilots over the years, and most of them are good at their jobs. But what you did in that valley wasn't just good flying, it was something special. You didn't just save our lives. You made it look like it was just another day at the office." Phoenix accepted the compliment with the same understated professionalism that characterized everything about her approach to military service. "Chief, that's what we trained for. I'm just glad it worked out." But privately, she knew that Operation Blackwater had changed something fundamental about her relationship with both her aircraft and her profession. She had proven to herself and others that her unconventional background and approaches could translate into tactical success when the stakes were highest. More importantly, she had earned the respect of the special operations community in a way that no amount of training or credentials could have accomplished. The weeks that followed brought a series of tactical assignments that seemed designed to test whether Phoenix's success had been a fluke or represented genuine capability at the highest levels of combat operations. Each mission was slightly more complex than the last, with enemy forces that seemed increasingly determined to bring down the pilot who had become something of a legend in the region. Phoenix approached each assignment with the same methodical preparation that had characterized her planning for Operation Blackwater, studying terrain features, weather patterns, and enemy capabilities, until she could visualize every aspect of the mission before climbing into her cockpit. Her new aircraft, a factory-fresh A-10 that Tours had personally selected and prepared, became as familiar to her as her previous machine had been. The tactical innovations that Phoenix developed during this period would later be incorporated into official Air Force doctrine, but at the time, they were simply creative solutions to complex problems. Her use of terrain masking to defeat surface-to-air missile systems, her techniques for conducting close air support in urban environments, and her methods for coordinating with ground forces became the subject of classified studies that were distributed throughout the tactical aviation community. What set Phoenix apart from other skilled pilots wasn't just her flying ability, but her understanding of how air power could be integrated with ground operations to achieve effects that neither could accomplish independently. She spent her free time studying the tactics and procedures used by special operations forces, learning their communication protocols and operational preferences until she could anticipate their needs before they were articulated. This dedication to professional development caught the attention of Colonel Sarah Blackwood, the wing commander, who had initially been skeptical of Phoenix's unconventional approach to military aviation. Blackwood had commanded combat wings for over 15 years and had seen enough talented pilots to recognize something exceptional when it appeared. "Nakamura, I'm recommending you for the weapons school," Blackwood announced during what Phoenix had expected to be a routine performance evaluation. "Your tactical innovations need to be shared with the broader pilot community, and you need the advanced training that will prepare you for higher levels of responsibility." The weapons school recommendation was the highest professional compliment that could be paid to a tactical pilot, representing recognition that Phoenix had transcended individual excellence to become someone capable of teaching others how to achieve similar levels of performance. It also meant leaving the combat zone for 6 months of intensive training at Nellis Air Force Base, where the most challenging aspects of military aviation were taught to the most promising pilots in the service. Phoenix accepted the assignment with mixed emotions, understanding the career implications while also feeling reluctant to leave the operational environment where she had found her professional identity. But the opportunity to influence how future pilots approach the kind of challenges she had faced was too important to decline. Her final mission before departing for weapons school was a complex close air support operation in support of a multinational special operations team that had been conducting reconnaissance deep in enemy territory. The mission parameters were similar to many others she had flown, but the symbolic importance of her final combat sortie gave it special meaning for both Phoenix and the personnel who had worked with her during her deployment. The flight proceeded without unusual incident until Phoenix received an emergency call from the ground team, requesting immediate assistance against enemy forces that had discovered their observation post. The tactical situation was complicated by the presence of civilian structures in the target area, requiring precision that went beyond normal close air support procedures. Phoenix's response demonstrated all of the skills and innovations she had developed during her combat tour, using a combination of terrain masking, precision weaponry, and coordination with ground forces to eliminate the enemy threat without causing collateral damage. The mission was completed successfully, but what made it memorable was the radio transmission she received as she departed the target area. "Phoenix, this is Ghost Team Leader. Outstanding work as always. The special operations community is going to miss having you overhead. Safe travels, and thank you for everything you've done for us out here." The words came from Lieutenant Colonel David Kim, a special operations veteran whose teams had worked with Phoenix on 7 different missions during her deployment. His acknowledgement represented the acceptance and respect from the special operations community that Phoenix valued more than any formal recognition or award. As Phoenix prepared for her departure to weapons school, she reflected on the transformation that had occurred during her combat deployment. She had arrived as an unproven pilot struggling to gain acceptance from her peers and superiors. She was leaving as a combat-tested aviator whose tactical innovations were being studied and emulated throughout the Air Force. The change wasn't just professional, it was personal. Phoenix had discovered reserves of courage and competence that she hadn't known she possessed, and she had proven that unconventional approaches could be successful when applied with intelligence and determination. More importantly, she had earned her place in the fraternity of combat pilots through performance rather than politics, achieving the kind of acceptance that couldn't be granted or withheld by others. The journey to Nellie's Air Force Base provided time for reflection on lessons learned and challenges overcome during a deployment that had exceeded every expectation. Phoenix understood that weapons school would present different kinds of challenges, focused on teaching and leadership rather than individual performance, but she felt prepared for whatever lay ahead. Her reputation had preceded her to Nevada, where instructors and students alike were aware of her combat record and tactical innovations. But Phoenix was determined to approach weapons school with the same humility and dedication to continuous learning that had characterized her entire military career. There was still much to learn, and she was eager to begin the next phase of her professional development. The desert landscape around Nellie's reminded Phoenix of the terrain where she had learned to fly combat missions, but the environment was different in fundamental ways. Here, the focus was on perfection rather than survival, on teaching principles that could be applied by others rather than solving immediate tactical problems. It was a transition that required Phoenix to think differently about her role and responsibilities. The first weeks of weapons school were intellectually challenging in ways that combat missions had never been. Phoenix found herself analyzing her own decision-making processes, breaking down instinctive reactions into teachable principles that could be transmitted to other pilots. The process was humbling, revealing how much of her combat success had been based on intuition that she hadn't fully understood herself. But the academic challenges were balanced by the opportunity to work with other exceptional pilots who brought their own experiences and perspectives to the learning environment. Phoenix found herself part of a community of aviators who shared her commitment to excellence and her understanding of the responsibilities that came with flying combat missions. Her classmates initially viewed Phoenix with curiosity rather than skepticism, aware of her combat record, but uncertain how her unconventional background would translate to the theoretical environment of weapons school. That uncertainty was quickly resolved, as Phoenix demonstrated the same analytical skills that had made her successful in combat operations. The tactical problems presented at weapons school were more complex than anything Phoenix had encountered in actual combat, designed to test not just flying skills but strategic thinking and leadership capabilities. Each scenario required integration of multiple aircraft, coordination with ground forces, and consideration of political factors that went beyond pure military effectiveness. Phoenix excelled in these exercises, bringing a perspective shaped by actual combat experience to theoretical problems that some of her classmates approached as intellectual puzzles. Her solutions were often unconventional but invariably effective, demonstrating the kind of tactical innovation that had made her successful during her deployment. The midpoint evaluation came with recognition that Phoenix was performing at the top of her class, but also with challenges that pushed her beyond her comfort zone. She was assigned to lead increasingly complex missions, requiring her to coordinate the actions of other pilots while maintaining her own high standards of performance. These leadership responsibilities revealed aspects of Phoenix's character that hadn't been tested during individual combat missions. She discovered that she possessed natural teaching abilities, capable of communicating complex tactical concepts in ways that other pilots could understand and apply. More importantly, she learned that her unconventional approaches could be systematized and taught to others. The final phase of weapons school focused on preparing graduates to serve as instructors and tactical leaders in operational environments. Phoenix was selected for additional training that would qualify her to teach advanced close air support techniques, a recognition of both her combat experience and her demonstrated ability to analyze and communicate tactical principles. The graduation ceremony was attended by senior officers from throughout the Air Force, including several who had followed Phoenix's career progression from her initial assignment through her combat deployment. The recognition she received was gratifying, but what meant more was the knowledge that she was now qualified to pass along the lessons she had learned to the next generation of combat pilots. Colonel Blackwood, who had traveled from the combat theater to attend the ceremony, approached Phoenix after the formal proceedings with a characteristic directness. "Nakamura, I have an assignment for you that's going to challenge everything you've learned here. There's a training squadron at Luke that needs someone who can teach young pilots how to survive in combat. Interested?" The offer represented exactly the kind of responsibility that Phoenix had hoped to earn through her performance at weapons school. Training new pilots was one of the most important assignments in the Air Force, requiring not just tactical expertise, but the ability to prepare others for the challenges they would face in combat operations.